Welcome to Forensic Friday,
where we examine the intersection of true crime, psychology, and the heart of being human in the middle of it all. So pardon my pink face. I'm a little pinker than normal. Just a little bit.
from your facial.
My cryofacial. You know, your girl's turning 40, so I'm just going to stay ahead of you for the rest of our lives. And I will find all the things to age in reverse. This is the goal, right?
Love that. We're also getting a tattoo.
We're getting tattoos. That's right. Well, you already have tattoos, but this is
You're getting a tattoo.
I'm getting a tattoo, which is great. You know how edgy I am. It's really shocking I don't have a tattoo already.
I know.
So, had my facial this morning. How are you doing? What have you been up to?
Oh, girl. It's been wedding season again.
Well, you're always in wedding season, perpetually in wedding season.
It's just funny, though, because, like, being 35, I'm like, I thought wedding season would have been over, but it was a fun wedding, beautiful wedding. Loved it.
I miss you when you're not around the office. It's just not the same.
I know. I miss being there.
You know? Well, today we really have a case that you know almost nothing about, which is going to be kind of fun.
Yes, I'm so excited.
It's rare for me to find a case. You're such a little true crime buff. It's hard for me to find a case you don't know everything about already.
I know. That's how I feel about you.
So, well, that's because we like all the same stuff.
I know. It's a blessing and a curse.
Hey, Nat, we should start a podcast about
right?
So, I'm going to drop a joke on you. It's a terrible joke. I'm warning you in advance. It's a bit of a dad joke, but it's a great segue into what we're doing today.
I'm ready.
Roses are red. Violets are glorious. Don't get stuck in a bathroom with Oscar Pistorius. Isn't that terrible?
That's not a dad joke. That's a good joke.
It's a little bit of a dad joke. So in all seriousness, today's episode is going to center around Oscar Pistorius. He's a world famous double amputee sprinter that competed in the 2012 Olympic Games in London, representing South Africa. It's noteworthy that he competed using carbon fiber blades against non-disabled athletes. He was arrested on Valentine's Day 2013 after he shot and killed his then girlfriend, model, actress, and activist Reeva Steenkamp. So this was a massive case. I'm kind of surprised you didn't hear about it, but what were you doing in 2009? Maybe that's why you didn't hear about it.
I was in college.
Okay.
This was like when social media was like still ramping up, I think.
Yeah, because Facebook started in 2002, 2003 when I was a freshman at CU. So social media was still kind of newer.
Yep. Yes. So I don't know what I was doing. I mean, I was in college.
You were in college. I had just finished grad school.
Not reading the news.
I just remember thinking, you know, the London Olympics were fun because we had the women's gymnastics team, won gold. And that was super exciting. What were they called? The Fab Five?
I think so.
I always think of the Fab Five as the Michigan Fab Five in the 90s, which I had a crush on every one of them. I mean, I could have put them in an order. The top, Jalen Rose, is my most favorite. But those were my Fab Five. But the Fab Five won the Olympics for gymnastics in this same Olympics.
Yes.
But I do remember him as a sprinter, and he ran on the coolest, they called him like Blade Runner. I think that was kind of his.
Yes. I do remember him. I remember something about him and the victim to this case, but I don't know much about it.
Okay. Well, let me get you up to speed.
Okay.
So basically, Oscar Leonard Carl Pistorius.
That's a name.
Quite a name. They named him
quite the name.
To do big things. Born on the 22nd of November, 1986. Oh, he's in between us age-wise.
Yeah, I was going to say, he's only 2 years older than me.
I know. His feet were amputated when he was 11 months old. It was a congenital defect. So it wasn't like an accident or anything like that. He was born missing the outside of both feet
Hmm.
and both of his fibulae, which I'm thinking is fibula times two.
Okay.
Fibulae is plural for fibula,
Yes.
I
Yes.
guess. So basically, he was this incredible runner and he did the Paralympic Games for years and really was amazing. And he was so good that
Hmm.
he actually qualified for the Olympic Games to run again against non-disabled athletes.
That's awesome.
It's incredible, really. And I just remember watching him thinking, like, what an incredible human being. And of course, people were so taken with his story and became big
Hmm.
fans of his. Basically, he competed. I don't believe he won a medal. I didn't go too far into the Olympic history because we have enough to dissect with the crime itself.
Right. But overall, just an amazing athlete.
Overall, amazing athlete, really incredible, very resilient. And after the Olympics, I mean, the endorsements were endless. He was on commercials, made a bunch of money. He continued to live in South Africa,
Okay.
and he ended up dating Reeva Steenkamp, who is unfortunately the victim in this case. And so
Hmm.
Reeva, leading up to this, she's beautiful. You and I were talking
Yes.
about this before we jumped on.
Yeah, I was going to say, I Googled her and she's just a beautiful human.
She's a beautiful human being, and she was a model and had done a little bit of TV work and, was in this relationship. So they were at his home, and very early in the morning on Valentine's Day, so February 14th, 2013. So this is only, I mean, not even 6 months after the Olympics. It was the Summer Games of 2012. This is February of 2013. They'd been dating for 3 months. She's at his place, and
That's a short amount of time.
it's real short, which we're going to talk about in
Yeah.
a bit because that's quick.
Especially for like domestic violence and all of
Uh-huh.
that. Like that's a quick escalation
So
period.
quick. They were only together for 3 months. So basically, Pistorius called 911 in those early morning hours of February 14th.
So he called.
He called.
Okay.
So let me read a couple of the pieces. I could feel her blood was running down on me, Pistorius said. I could see her arm was broken.
He did some damage.
Uh-huh. He realized Steenkamp was struggling to breathe, so he swiveled around on the floor and pulled her into the bathroom so he could put her down softly on the carpet. He said he couldn't pick her up, so he pulled her into the bathroom and put her down, which she was in like there was like a separate little toilet room. And
Okay.
so that's where she was with the door closed, by the way, and I'm fairly certain the door was locked. There's a lot of discrepancy around that. Obviously, his report's going to be different, but he pulled her out of that toilet room and laid her down in the bathroom.
So was she already dead at that point?
He says that she was struggling to breathe. And one of the things he said in that clip was he was using his fingers to try to help her breathe.
Right.
Hmm. He tried to use her cell phone to call for help, but it had a passcode. So he ran into the bedroom to get one of his two cell phones. Also, bro, I got two cell phones, but we'll come back to that. He used one to call a neighbor to ask for help.
Okay. He couldn't call 911 himself.
Ah, fascinating. He said, I knew there was nothing I could do for her. So he called, the call was at 3:19 a.m. He called the security office at 3:21 a.m. for the neighborhood, his gated community, and then called 911 at 3:25 a.m.
Jeez.
He waited downstairs for ambulance. He dragged her downstairs and said he waited in anguish for the ambulance to arrive. I felt helpless. I had my fingers in her mouth to help her breathe. He said he put pressure on her hip to stem the bleeding. Reeva had already died whilst I was holding her. I knew there was nothing I could do for her.
So we haven't really gotten into this yet. So tell me if you're going to do this later, but how
Yeah.
did she die?
Okay, so let me give you the rundown here. So basically, it's Valentine's Day, 3 o'clock in the morning. essentially what happened, just the facts, not Pistorius's story, but just the facts. Reeva was in the toilet room, the separate little room within the bathroom,
Okay.
with the door closed. And Pistorius shot through the door 4 times. She was hit all 4 times.
Jeez.
And I believe it was a 9 millimeter. I'll get into that. And what he later said was he was certain it was an intruder. He was afraid.
In his bathroom?
This is his story. His story is that he had heard something. He got up out of bed, went into the bathroom, the door was closed, and he shot through the door. So we'll get into some of the details of the testimony
Okay.
in a few minutes. But yep. And he said he just sat in the kitchen on the floor crying. And that the smell of blood was making him throw up. I don't remember washing my chest. I just remember washing my hands and washing my face. Every time I saw her, I got sick. That's basically what his story was. And then a police officer told Pistorius he was under arrest because he was the only person in the house. So he had to remove his prosthetic legs. It actually talks about how he broke the bathroom door down to get to her body. He had to use a cricket bat. Basically, in the trial, one of the biggest pieces, and we're going to talk about this with psychology, one of the biggest pieces was whether or not he was wearing his prosthetics when the crime happened, right?
Interesting.
And he was not. He was not. So he was standing on his stumps. He was not wearing his prosthetics when he shot through the door 4 times. So they made him in the courtroom demonstrate how he did these things. So he literally had to quite literally walk around the courtroom without his prosthetics. And they had him like hold a cricket bat, demonstrate how he broke down the door. They looked at the heights of the bullet holes in the doors, that kind of stuff. That ended up being a huge part of the case.
Oh, dang.
I know. I know. Okay, so I'll play a couple more clips for you so you get a feel.
Okay, yeah.
Let's see. I want to find where they say he broke down. Okay, he says, I did not intend to kill Reeva or anyone else for that matter. And then this is when he broke down on the stand. So I'm going to play this one.
Okay.
I thought that there was a burglar that was gaining entry into my home. The first thing that ran through my mind was that I needed to arm myself, that I needed to protect Reeva and that I needed to get my gun. I shouted for Reeva to get on the floor. I shouted for her to phone the police. Before I knew it, I'd fired 4 shots at the door. My ears were ringing. I couldn't hear anything. So I shouted. I kept on shouting for Reeva to phone the police. I felt if Reeva was there and I couldn't feel anything. I think it was at that point, Melody, that it first dawned upon me that it could be Reeva that was in the bathroom or in the toilet. At that point, all I wanted to do was just look inside to see if it was Reeva. I flung the door open, I threw it open, and I sat over Reeva and I cried. I don't know how long I was there for. She was everything.
One thing that's interesting in one of his pieces of his testimony is he read out loud text messages that she sent, including one in which she said she was scared of him.
Interesting.
And he admitted he wasn't kind to her like he should have been. He said one of these messages arrived on, quote unquote, a bad day in our relationship. He added, you're going to love this, Nat. This is classic. He added, I was a bit upset. I felt neglected. I was being sensitive, insecure, or jealous.
Oh, yep. There it is.
Yep. And then there
it is.
There it is. And then also, he explained how he always carries a gun. He always carries a gun. And I think prior to this offense, he had been reported for firing a bullet through the sunroof of a car leading up to. And I don't think that was a domestic violence incident. I think that was a situation that had happened previously, but he carried a gun all the time.
Fascinating.
Uh-huh. So he's arrested the night that this happens. Like, there's no one else in the house. He's emotional. All this stuff is happening, and he maintains that whole time. I thought it was an intruder. It's all been a terrible mistake. That's his take on the whole thing, right? So he's arrested. His murder trial began on March 3rd, 2014, in the Pretoria High Court. So basically, he went in and he had to do a bunch of psychiatric evaluations, which was pretty interesting. I researched that a bit.
Okay.
They determined he could be held criminally responsible for the shooting, meaning he was not insane. He didn't have a major mental health issue that would prevent him from testifying.
Okay.
There was a forensic psychiatrist who testified that she diagnosed him with generalized anxiety disorder, but he could be held criminally responsible.
Okay.
So,
I mean, there's plenty of people who are diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and don't shoot at the door 4 times.
that's exactly right, including myself, yours truly.
It's same.
I really think 99% of our country has generalized anxiety disorder.
Oh, 100%.
So during this court case, and you and I spoke about this when we were planning for this episode, but basically throughout the court case, there were a couple of things that became big topics of conversation. One had to do with his prosthetics. Was he wearing them? Was he not wearing them? How premeditated was the situation? Was he really afraid someone had intruded? And if there was an intruder, did he take actions that made sense in that case?
Right.
They had him walk around without his prosthetics. They looked at the height of the bullet holes in the door. They gave him a cricket bat. Apparently, and we heard this in the audio clip, the door was locked. So after he shot through the door, he had to break that door down to pull Reeva out of the toilet room.
Wow.
And lay her on the floor in the bathroom. So that's kind of an interesting part of this trial was actually the disability that he had and how that may have played out in the offense. Ultimately, he was found guilty of culpable homicide and one firearm-related charge of reckless endangerment related to discharging a firearm in a restaurant. So things always plead down. That's true in South Africa as it is here.
Yeah.
How many times, Nat, have we met with somebody who says, "Well, I wasn't convicted of that."
Right.
They're charged with
doesn't mean it didn't happen.
strangulation. Yeah, they're charged with strangulation. They're convicted of assault or something like that.
Yep.
Same is true in South Africa.
Yep.
He was found not guilty of 2 other firearm-related charges relating to possession of illegal ammunition and firing a firearm through the sunroof of a car. And I don't know as much about the sunroof situation, but it sounds like it was a separate incident that got brought up in the context of this hearing.
Okay.
He received a prison sentence of a maximum of 5 years for culpable homicide and a concurrent 3-year suspended prison sentence for the separate reckless endangerment conviction. So basically, culpable homicide in South Africa is equivalent to manslaughter in the US.
Okay.
So basically, in the case, they established that he killed her. There's no question about it. He used a 9mm semi-automatic pistol. We know for certain that Oscar Pistorius killed Reeva Steenkamp on Valentine's Day 2013. There's no question about that.
No, well, and he admits it.
He admits it fully. He admitted it that evening.
Yeah.
Only thing that was up for debate was it on purpose? Did he know what he was doing when he did it? Who he was shooting? And that's why this episode is really focused on intent and domestic violence dynamics.
Okay.
So he's sentenced. He's in prison. On November 4th, 2014, the prosecutors went back to the sentencing judge for permission to appeal the culpable homicide verdict. So the prosecutors go, "This is ridiculous." And they're actually quoted as saying that the term was shockingly light, inappropriate, and would not have been imposed by any reasonable court. And I would have to agree with that. I mean, I think the prosecutors were right to go 5 years. Are you kidding me?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? So they appealed the sentencing specifically. But to do that, they had to actually really look at was it premeditated or not.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why then it came back up and they did a whole big appeal. The appeal didn't happen until November of 2015.
Mm.
Basically, where they landed is that the judge made an error when the judge determined that he didn't know that he was going to kill or injure whoever was behind that door firing 4 times.
That's wild.
I think most people who shoot a gun 4 times through a door know that they have a pretty good chance of hurting or killing the person behind that door, whoever that person is.
Yes, especially in like, from what it sounds like, the bathroom was pretty small. She was behind, like it doesn't sound like there was a ton of room for her to hide from him.
That's exactly right. So there was a panel of 5 judges that came together to look at this appeal. And I'm going to read the summary judgment.
Okay.
Panel of 5 judges found for the prosecutor's argument that Pistorius must have known that someone would die if he fired through the closed door into the small toilet cubicle. In the words of Judge Leach, who was the presiding judge, although he may have been anxious, it's inconceivable that a rational person could have believed he was entitled to fire at this person with a heavy caliber firearm without taking even the most elementary precaution of firing a warning shot, which the accused said he elected not to fire as he thought the ricochet might harm him. So he didn't want to fire a warning shot because he was worried it might hurt him.
That makes zero sense.
I know that one didn't hold up very well.
Yeah, good.
So he was sentenced to a second prison term, which is unusual. We don't see this very often. So he basically got 6 years rather than the original sentencing of 5 years. And they had him in a hospital wing, partially because he had kind of fallen down at one point and hurt his wrist or something. Basically, there was a lot of back and forth going on about his sentencing, what was appropriate, what was not appropriate. And then, the disability becomes kind of a central focus as well. He was released from prison for 4 hours for his grandmother's funeral. I cannot tell you how many people we have counseled who have lost people while they've been incarcerated, and most are not let out for a funeral.
Oh, for sure. Even the ones that we've worked with who've been on probation sometimes aren't allowed to travel.
That's exactly right. So I'm not saying, that he shouldn't have been at his grandmother's funeral, but I find that disheartening if I'm the victim's family.
Absolutely.
To just get out for 4 years for a funeral.
Yeah.
So then they had a parole hearing in March of 2023, and his parole was considered for early release after serving only half of his sentence. The release was opposed by Reeva's parents, of course. Basically, Reeva's mother, June, said he's not remorseful or rehabilitated. But the parole lawyer said he was a model prisoner and he would have had several options ranging from day parole or correctional supervision, which I'm guessing is like our community corrections.
Sure.
Pistorius was denied parole. He was denied parole. The lawyer for the family said that they were advised that it had been denied and it would be considered again a year later. A year later, it was announced that he would be released on parole.
Wow.
And when interviewed, the mother said, June Steenkamp, Reeva's mother, said she didn't oppose his parole because, quote, she simply couldn't muster the energy to face him again at this stage.
Yeah.
This poor mother had fought for years and years and years, and he still got out early. He was released this year, Nat. He was released on January 5th of this year. And he does have, kind of your typical parole. He had home detention, in-home detention.
Yeah.
I think at this stage he's transitioned out of in-home detention, but he still has parameters. I mean, he's going to be on parole for quite some time, but still he's out of prison.
Well, and I think what's scary about, I mean, it's all scary. What's really scary about this case is he's a very well-known athlete. He doesn't have, from what it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, massive criminal history. He has some weird gun things going on. I don't know what's with that, but
yep.
He's gonna be a model, quote unquote, if you could see me right now, air quotes, right?
Right.
A model like prisoner. He's gonna behave, he's gonna follow the rules because he knows how to do that.
He's a self-disciplined person. He's an Olympian, for goodness sake.
Yes.
Some level of self-discipline.
Exactly. And so what's scary about this is that he is now out. Even though he's on parole, you and I both know that doesn't always stop people from hurting other people again, or just getting better at being criminals.
Absolutely. And the thing that really strikes me, and I saw your face, obviously the listeners can't, but I saw your face, 3-month relationship, Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
It's also interesting to me, one aspect of the defense's case was he fired without his prosthetics. So they painted this picture that he hears something in the bathroom. He gets up out of bed. He tells Reeva to call the cops. He runs into the bathroom. He hears something in the toilet room and fires, right? This thing falls apart in 2 seconds because
I'm going to
go for it.
I want to make a joke about running, but I'm going to refrain, but it just came to my head. So that's all I'm going to say. I hope we don't get that edited out because I think it's hilarious.
He's fairly quick, even without his prosthetics.
What?
So he is quick. So, okay. 3-month relationship, Valentine's Day. He had to literally walk past Reeva's side of the bed. Okay. So he's not wearing his prosthetics. He's moving quick. He showed it in court. He can move pretty quick. He moves pretty quick. He goes into the bathroom. He fires through the door, through a locked door that this woman was in.
So do we know if he checked if the door was locked before he fired?
I don't believe so.
Okay, so he fired the shots and then
the door was locked.
Okay, notice the door was locked. Okay.
Yes. Now, to my knowledge, looking at the accounts, I didn't read the full transcripts of the trial. I suppose I could. There was nothing about him trying the door, hollering out to someone who might be in that room. I mean, I'm just thinking about all of your normal first steps. And even in America, where we have the make my day law, right? It's leave. I have a gun. I mean, you have to kind of warn someone.
Yes.
And to shoot through a closed door is just wild.
Well, exactly. I won't get too far into this because I don't know if I can or should, but where I used to live, where a neighbor like down the street had a situation where someone broke in. They were on, I believe it was methamphetamine, and he ended up having that situation happen where he had to shoot at this human being. But, followed all of those guidelines, like said, hey, I have a gun, stop like coming closer to me. You have broken into my home.
Yep.
Fired a warning shot. He did the whole 9 yards and did not, I mean, he went to the police station, whatever, but nothing happened to him because he followed the steps you have to follow.
Absolutely. And I can see the prosthetic piece playing both ways. Sure.
What do you mean?
Maybe so the defense's take is he was so afraid and felt like he had to respond immediately. So he just gets out of bed really quickly, doesn't put his prosthetics on, whatever. My thing, though, too, is that actually tracks with crime of passion as well. If he's royally pissed off and Reeva left the bed and went and locked herself in the bathroom and they were fighting, 100% he's going to come flying out of that bed.
Oh, 100%.
And so for me, I don't know that proves anything, but that is probably the number one piece that the defense tried to use.
Okay.
Now, couple other pieces that you don't know yet that I want to throw at you and see what you think.
Okay.
He read text messages sent by his slain girlfriend, including one in which she said she was scared of him and admitted that he wasn't kind to her like he should have been. So Pistorius even admitted he didn't treat her probably as well as he should have.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was further examined, cross-examined about the messages, he said that one of the messages arrived on, quote, a bad day in the relationship. And then here's the kicker, Nat. I want to get your hot take on this because I already know this one's gonna light you up.
Mm-hmm.
He added, I was a bit upset. I felt neglected. I was being sensitive, insecure, or jealous.
Oh, he for sure got out of his bed, ran across that room because he was mad. Probably thought she was texting someone or calling someone or something and shot through that door.
That's what I think too. And the neglected piece really stands out to me because to me, that is it's a morbid way to say it, but the nail in the coffin for me, because when we talk about domestic violence and we're getting into these dynamics as an evaluator and a therapist, that is the feeling many times. And it's an attachment wound.
Yeah.
And it comes out in this feeling neglected, feeling abandoned, jealousy, ownership, all of those things kind of come into it. So the minute I read that quote, Nat, I was like, oh,
he did it.
This is a pattern of behavior. And I would be very surprised. Obviously, we can't know for certain, but I would be very surprised if he didn't know Reeva was behind that door. Also, if you feel neglected by someone, you tend to know exactly where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And as any mother, and I'm a mother who has gotten up in the middle of the night with my baby, the very first thing I do is check on that baby.
Yes.
I know where my husband is at all times. So the notion that he got out of bed and walked past where she was in the bed and then went back to the bed to find her after, how hard is it how big is their bed?
Right.
How hard is it to find someone in the bed?
Right.
And if you're so concerned with her safety, why not secure her first? He could have run out of the house.
Well, that's what I was just thinking. So my thought is if I wake up scared, I hear something, the first thing I'm going to do is reach over and see if my husband's next to me.
Oh, absolutely.
First thing. And same for him.
An argument to be made then that as a man, he felt like he had to do something different than you or I would do?
Well, no, because I believe my husband would do the same thing where he would reach over, make sure I'm there, and then handle whatever's happening. So it's just his whole story. I just can't believe any of his story because like you said, I mean, this text message is, I mean, on point for domestic violence and motive, right? And you and I both know with domestic violence, my guess is he probably, that Valentine's Day didn't wake up thinking I'm going to kill my girlfriend today.
Totally.
However, because you and I both know that it's usually, for lack of better terminology, a crime of passion, right? Based on feelings of neglect, based on feelings of insecurity and jealousy and all of those things. And so, yeah, he woke up. She wasn't next to him. I bet you, and again, this is all speculation, case is done. He's out on parole, which is crazy.
Yep.
But I would bet he knew she wasn't by him, and that's why he got out of the bed.
Yes. Yep. That's what I think too. And it's interesting. We talk about objectification in domestic violence. And it's interesting to me, if you have a favorite toy, you typically know where your toy is. So this level of ownership, jealousy, some of these pieces that we see coming into play, I would expect to see this in a domestic violence relationship. I'm not saying that she didn't have a lot of unhealth in this relationship too. We don't know. But she didn't shoot through a locked door 4 times either. So we're not going to, interesting. Nope. That's not the point, right?
Right.
And I'm really struggling to not, I really tried to try on his experience and I'm trying to think, okay, South Africa, high crime rate. Interestingly, Reeva was an advocate for women's safety even before the offense. Because I guess in South Africa, there's a lot of crime, not just your standard issue crime, but crime against women. So she was already an activist before this even happened to her. But a 3-month relationship, to feel afraid of your partner that quickly, for him to feel upset, neglected, insecure, and jealous 3 months in. And by the way, it's freaking Valentine's Day.
Right.
I don't know that we can like ignore that fact.
No.
It feels kind of important in a case where someone kills their partner.
Well, and even going back to what you just said, the 3-month thing, because you and I both know, and I'm curious of your thoughts on this. You and I both know with the cycle of violence, the violence gets bigger as time goes on, the cycle gets faster, right? And we end up skipping the pleasure parts of the cycle of violence, the reconciliation and the honeymoon.
That's right.
3 months is a short time
really short.
for him to jump from beginning of the relationship to killing her. Like you and I both know, usually it takes much longer than that.
Absolutely. And the other interesting piece, because when I hear that, then I start thinking, okay, so this is a controlling human. I think we have enough to say that. Just in the sense that he felt neglected, alone. I feel pretty comfortable saying there's an element of control. What's interesting to me, though, I did some more research because I'm like, what's up with this dude? There's got to be more, right? He was in a very serious accident. This was in, I'm trying to see what year it was. It was before 2009. So 4 years before this all happened. He was in a terrible boating accident near Johannesburg where he was airlifted to the hospital to repair broken facial bones, including his nose and his jaw.
Oh, gosh.
So then my brain starts going from a treatment perspective, which, by the way, in none of this did I see that he had treatment. I'm assuming he had some treatment in prison, but that wasn't made a big deal of in court. So from a treatment perspective, Nat, if he came into an evaluation with you, and also side note, he's related to a South African psychological profiler. His aunt is a literal profiler, like FBI level profiler in South Africa. Anyway, would love to get her thoughts. Hey, Mickey Pistorius, if you want to reach out and give us your hot take, I'd love that. Although she may not like us very much at the end of this podcast episode, who knows? That is for sure a brain injury of some sort. It just has to be. You don't have that many fractures in your face without having a head injury. So if Oscar Pistorius comes into your office, Natalie, and you're going through the history and you're hearing all this stuff, and he's putting on his best face, right? Of course. But he tells you about the head injury. How does that affect your treatment plan with him, potentially? And how do you assess that?
The way I would assess that is, one, my treatment recommendations would be based on all of those things, right? Power and control dynamics, because just because he potentially has a brain injury or TBI doesn't mean that those power and control dynamics weren't already there. He is a highly known athlete, as we've discussed.
Do you see any overlap, Nat, between the high performing and maybe some of the control pieces? Is that something you see?
I don't want to generalize too much. However, my opinion would be yes. I mean, when you are a famous athlete, you are so rigid. I had this, a couple months of training for a show, and that was rigid.
I thought I was going to have to carry you to your car. When you cut water,
right,
you were like a different person.
It was, my brain was like in a different world. But I even think back to that, and like, that's nothing compared to obviously these like famous athletes. But I think back to that, and I had to be controlled and regimented, and, like, I didn't really necessarily even feel like myself emotionally, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think of these athletes, and there's just a different element of control. But then you add in the fame, and yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I do think there's a correlation there.
And it's interesting because I can't find a lot of information about his family life. There are a few documentaries. We'll pop them on the website for you guys if you want to go do your own digging. But I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't have some exposure
Mm-hmm.
in his life at some point to, at a minimum, conflict that was not handled well.
Right.
But
Well,
then another piece, though, when you look at the firearm as well, that was the first go-to.
mm-hmm.
Maybe there's a trauma history we don't know about too. It's not an excuse, but
No.
we don't know. Like, we just don't know
Yeah.
his history. So along with the brain injury and the athlete, the controlled regimen, those things that we're assessing, trauma would be in there too.
Yes, absolutely. Trauma, TBI, power and control, family history, all of that. I mean, those are all the things we'd be looking at in order to treat him and to give him the best care that we could. Even what you said earlier around South Africa having like a high domestic violence rate or high criminal rate, I think is what you said.
Mm-hmm.
Correct me if I'm
Crime rate.
wrong.
Yep.
Crime rate. You know, if that's part of, how they grow up, then naturally he's going to follow suit in that too. I think there's a lot of different components to him that relate to what he's done, what happened.
Absolutely. So Nat, let's say, okay, he goes through the evaluation. Obviously, he's going to be highest risk.
Level
F.
Z.
Z. Yes. Technically, it only goes up to level C, but I'm going to say level Z for Oscar Pistorius.
Yes,
like, we're off the
absolutely.
charts. So he comes in for treatment, and let's say we hypothetically put him in an outpatient men's domestic violence group. So there's 11
Yes.
other men in this room, and he's
Yes.
telling his story.
Yes.
What do you think happens?
He tells the story that he told the court.
Yep. And then what?
And the group probably believes him.
Why would they believe him?
Well, actually, let me take that back. It would depend on the group that we put
Depends
him
on
in.
the group, right?
It depends on the group that we put him in, because we do have some groups that are geared towards stage of change, where they're at in their own narrative.
Well, let's be clear, no one believes him.
Right.
No one's going to believe him. The question is, do they support his narrative because they similarly feel wronged by the judicial system, or do they challenge him?
Again, it depends on the group.
Depends on the group.
I would love to think that they would challenge him because it's so unbelievable.
It's so unbelievable.
So that would be my hope, that he would be challenged in one of our groups.
That's the reason these guys are in groups. Oscar
Exactly.
Pistorius needed a freaking group. I don't know if he needed to be in the hospital part of the prison. He seemed to be functioning fairly well that night when he shot through the door.
Yes.
But he needs to be in a group of men who hear the story, and maybe one of them goes, "Hey, bro, that's not real believable."
Right.
Are you sure? Are you
That's
sure?
what happened?
Are you sure that's what happened? You're going to go with that? That's your story?
Well, yeah. I would hope that that's what our group members would say. I actually think most of them would.
Yes,
to be honest.
but you are correct. Sometimes what happens, and this is my concern, Nat, you and I've had clients who have done treatment in prison, jail, community corrections, or outpatient in our office, right? And we've seen people who've done treatment several times, which is always interesting.
Yeah.
But in this particular case, the concern I have for treatment in prison people do not give the same kind of feedback in prison as they do in outpatient care. I've heard this from people over the years who've done both. And what he really needs, I think, is peer feedback.
Yeah.
When a therapist looks at you and says, dude, that's not believable at all, that doesn't mean as much as another person in your same situation who's going through classes, who's frustrated, who feels misunderstood in some levels, right? Looking at you and going, that doesn't make any sense. I think you killed her.
Right. Right. Well, I completely agree with that. If it comes from you and me, and you and I see this all the time, when it comes from you and me, especially towards the beginning of people's treatment, we are seen as if we are in the system. We are the judge.
An extension.
Right? We might as well be sitting right next to the judge. And so I completely agree with you. When it comes from peers, and peers can actually call them out and say, hey, like you said, that's just not believable. I think you killed her. And I think you did it. Well, obviously, I know you killed her, but I think you did it because of insecurity, jealousy, whatever.
Well, and then, okay, so if we take a step back, couple of things. Number one, can he get better? Is there a way to intervene with somebody like Oscar Pistorius? What do you think?
Well, it's funny. I'm going to answer that in just a second. It's funny you asked that, because I was just thinking of, prevention work. I think the sad piece about a lot of these stories is it's reactive instead of proactive.
Yes.
Right. And so like, I'm sitting here thinking like, man, how can we continue to build? And I think that's part of our goal with our podcast is how can we continue to build proactive resources so that individuals like this don't end up killing their girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever, or spouses, significant others. How can we be more preventative instead of reactive? So going back to your question, can he get better? I mean, my genuine belief in humanity most of the time, I shouldn't say all the time, but most of the time, is that yes, we can get better. It takes a lot of self-awareness, accountability, support in order to make those changes. I don't know what that looks like for him. However, yes, I do believe people generally can get better. I think where I struggle is he seemed pretty dang married to his narrative.
Yep.
And he not only, he didn't just hurt her, he killed her. And that changes everything. That changes everything.
Well, and as a celebrity and with all the attention that this case got, it's almost like O.J. Simpson, who we're gonna tackle him in a different episode. Yes. But he came out with, if I did it, this is how it happened, sort of. Yeah. It's insane. But, somebody like Oscar Pistorius, you can't walk this back. He's done prison time. He has done this narrative over and over and over again for years. Yeah. I don't see him walking this back publicly. No. I don't see him walking this back with very many people.
No.
One of the prevention pieces, and this is the heart of what we wanted to talk about in this episode, Reeva's mother started a foundation, the Reeva Steenkamp Foundation, to help prevent violence towards women, particularly domestic violence. And I'm sitting here and all I can think about is Von Miller, because that's the last episode we recorded. And I'm sitting here going, oh my gosh, he doesn't even have a record in Colorado. He doesn't have a record. I don't know if he does in Texas, where that one offense occurred. But I'm thinking one of the ways that we can prevent this level of violence is educating women that if you feel afraid of your partner at any point, it matters. And at a minimum, you need to talk to somebody who can help you evaluate what's happening and how to keep yourself safe. But also, if you feel afraid 3 months in, you got to start looking at getting resources to get out. And it can be that quick that you can get stuck.
Yes.
And it is in no way Reeva's fault that Oscar Pistorius killed her.
No.
It is not her fault. She
No.
would have no way of knowing that that would have happened. But from a prevention perspective, we have to empower women that if it doesn't smell right, if it doesn't feel right, you got to move faster. And we need to support women so much faster than we do.
I agree with that. And sometimes, and I'm curious of your perspective on this, but with resourcing for women, resources, you and I see a lot of the resources on the back end. So when the offense has already happened, right? Like we have a treatment, we have a victim advocate, probation has a victim advocate.
Yep.
Right. So we see all the back
Police
end.
departments have victim advocates.
Yes, we see all the back end support. I have talked to many individuals who are on the front end where there's no police record, there's not, cops have not been called yet, where resources are a little bit harder.
Oh, so much harder. And Nat, we're reputable clinicians in the field. People know who we are, particularly police officers typically have heard our name.
Yes.
Attorneys in our area where we work.
Yeah.
And I have actually counseled victims where I've had to have them walk into a police station with me on speakerphone and hand me over to the detective to get what they've needed in terms of safety and advocacy. So we have so much work to do on the front end. And so when I see these foundations, and it's wonderful to see. I think you and I were put on this planet, friend, to help make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
But I'm always really curious about maybe the community organizations that are getting out in front of it even better. And I'm hopeful that our podcast can support more of those organizations as well. And maybe we'll pop some on our website for you guys as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. Something else that just came to my mind for prevention as you and I move forward, right? Supporting the victims and also getting into like different organizations, schools, colleges, churches, organizations to talk about domestic violent dynamics for both the victim and the individuals who would be the perpetrators.
Maybe the churches will let us come now. This is my next thing.
That's what I'm thinking.
Can you imagine the squirming that would happen in a sanctuary?
Oh,
you get a
my
DV
gosh.
therapist on stage instead of a pastor that's maybe enabling this kind of behavior.
Yeah, exactly. Or even like CEOs of organizations or, so many of the guys that we've worked with say, I wish I had these tools in high school.
Oh, middle school.
I wish I knew these dynamics. I wish I knew I had resources for my own trauma before I got to this place of hurting somebody that I love. Right. And so there's my heart, naturally, and you and I've talked about this before of how we might get some beef for this, but my heart does have empathy for the offender side as well.
Absolutely.
And that's why you and I do the work we do, right? Is to help rehabilitate and change their patterns, their behavioral patterns, their thinking patterns.
Well, and I can see a world in which Oscar Pistorius has anxiety, has medical trauma, has a TBI, lives in a high crime area. I mean, he's in a gated community in a high crime area, but he's in a high crime area.
Which speaks to a different type of power and control, let's be real.
Okay, fair. That's fair too. But I can see a world in which he might have been hypervigilant or that might have contributed to how he was feeling on that particular day. I think where you and I land is there are too many factors against this thing being a mistaken identity self-defense case. 100%. I just do not buy it. So Oscar, you have our sincere apologies if we've gotten this wrong, sir, but I don't think we did.
And if you want treatment, call us.
Hit us up. I work with you. As long as you don't have a firearm. Remember,
the two of us would probably have to be in the office, but that's all right.
That's fair. I mean, we're the first line of defense anyway. Remember, roses are red, violets are glorious. Don't get stuck in a bathroom with Oscar Pistorius. Oh my gosh, Natalie.
And cut.
And scene. If you or someone you know is struggling in a domestic violence relationship, call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 or text BEGIN to 88788. I'm Janine.
And I'm Nat.
And as always, thanks for listening and join us next week for more Crime, Psychology, and Heart.